I'd like to call the meeting of the Bellingham Public Works Public Safety Committee to order. Joining me on the committee this morning is committee member Roxanne Murphy, and filling in for Jean Knutson will be April Barker. Thank you, April, for filling in this morning. We have 6 items before the committee this morning. The first one is the City of Bellingham and Fire District 8 contract for service discussion. Chief?
Thank you, Terry. Good morning, council members. Bill Newbold, Fire Chief. And what I have today to present to you for information only is an update on the process that we've been working between the City of Bellingham, Bellingham Fire Department, and Whatcom County Fire District 8. There's been a continued effort to move into the direction of a full consolidation between the two agencies, and largely that's to capitalize on the positive relationship that exists currently between the two agencies and our shared boundary up in our urban growth area and our shared responses into the two districts. Currently, we are operating under an administrative contract that was put in place back in 2013, whereby the City of Bellingham provides chief services, both myself and our 2 assistant chiefs and our administration within the fire department oversees those administrative aspects of Fire District 8. One of the explicit items in that contract was during the time frame to continue to explore a full functional consolidation. So we've had a lot of work going on in 2014 and 2015, and here today to share kind of some of that progress, and then potentially look for in the next month or so to be back in front of you with a potential contract. Again, one of the driving forces of this is to capitalize on the positive relationships that we've had between the two in our current response areas. Highlights of the contract that we are working on that will exist between the city and Fire District 8. A couple of the highlights of that are the 8 uniformed employees of Fire District 8 will be transferred over to the City of Bellingham and become City of Bellingham employees. The facilities that are currently owned by Fire District 8, as well as the fire apparatus that are owned by Fire District 8, will remain owned by Fire District 8, and then we will coordinate the repair, maintenance, upkeep of both the facilities and the apparatus. The current volunteer program that exists in Fire District 8 will remain under Fire District 8. Both agencies want to respect the long-term histories that each has, City of Bellingham being an all-career department, extensive history with that, and then also the community and the volunteer program that has supported Fire District 8. In recognizing that, we wanted to continue with that program. Not only that, but it helps with the available staffing in Fire District 8. So the volunteers will remain, the volunteer program will remain, but it will be administered underneath Fire District 8. The volunteers will not become volunteers of the City of Bellingham. That also has implications on both their compensation, how that's currently orchestrated, as well as their the volunteer pension board will be administered under Fire District 8. Additionally, it has some aspects with regard to the 1997 agreement, which is in place between the City of Bellingham and several of its neighboring fire districts. The 1997 agreement, as commonly as we refer to it, deals with mitigation of annexations that take place with the city annexing into various fire districts. It's modeled after the state requirements in the RCW. This contract addresses that, kind of sets it on the side right now under agreement of both of the two districts, the 2 agencies, Bellingham and District 8. And in the event that this full consolidation that we're looking at now for some reason doesn't continue indefinitely, we are able to pick back up the 1997 agreement and recognize and agree to some of the items that are in that. This also provides in the contract that we're looking at some solid staffing that provides some sustainable support into Fire District 8. 2 career officers and 1 career driver engineer will be provided over into District 8 to staff their 2 fire stations. That will involve 4 promotions from firefighters to captains. Currently, District 8 has 4 officers and 4 firefighters. Those 8 personnel will come over to the city, and then we will also see 4 promotions that will be able to provide the 2 career officers over to Fire District 8. We've been working internally with finance, legal, and RIT here in the city of Bellingham. Peter Raffato has helped us tremendously at drafting the contract for service between the city and the district. We've also had the reviews by the district's attorney as well, so all the parties are looped in on that. And then we're also working with Local 106 on an MOU that will be between the City of Bellingham and Local 106 BFD unit. We indicated in the agenda bill it's approximately about a $1.45 million expense that will be from the general fund with offsetting revenue that will come directly from Fire District 8. Again, that number is approximate. We're still working with IT to finalize the numbers on the interfund requirements for technology services. Moving to the MOU, we've had a really good relationship working with Local 106, and Local 106 recognizing that this future consolidation was on the horizon. Back in 2015, the 2 units of 106, both the Bellingham unit and the Fire District 8 unit, they got together, and between themselves, the Local 106 drafted an MOU that puts forth their recommendations to administration on how they would like to see the transfer of employees with regard to seniority, various other items with regard to their contract. So they ironed that out and ratified that back in March of 2015, and then that's being provided to us as some of their recommendations in which we will utilize and evaluate in drafting the MOU. But nonetheless, it's been I think a really progressive and forward discussions with 106 in support of what likely will be on the horizon should both of the parties enter into this agreement. And if you will, it's kind of almost negotiating the impacts up front rather than doing that afterwards. So it's been a real forward thinking, looking at what our interests are rather than positional. You remember some of your discussion over the weekend as far as positions and interests. And we've started looking at the base of that triangle on the interests and expressing the interest towards each other and formulating the MOU. So where we are now is looking at finalizing the contract between the City of Bellingham and Fire District 8, and then also working at finalizing an MOU. There's still elements of the MOU that we're working with 106 to put in there in a draft format and review that. And then if all of these continue moving at the pace that they are and with what we see the level of participation, it's possible to complete this in May, and then perhaps we'll be back in front of you May or June, which with maybe a contract for service with Fire District 8. That's all the information I have.
Any questions from committee? Yes, April.
So I think what I heard was that in March 2015, the MOU was brought forward?
In March of 2015, the Local 106, the 2 units of Local 106 got together, and between them, they worked out what their desires would be. Because 106 actually represents 2 different units. There are the employees of Fire District 8, and then there are the employees of the City of Bellingham. Okay. And so between them and with guidance from the State Council of the IAFF, worked at some of the best practices of integrating 2 work groups.
Okay. I just had a follow-up.
Any other?
I just had a follow-up
Okay.
to that. So what have you found in that what they brought forward are some of the things that have been more difficult to work out?
Actually, as far as difficulty, I really can't describe a level of difficulty. What I do know is that they were able to ratify that between the two parties. Some of the things that are on there discuss about seniority coming over, how you would blend that seniority of the two ranks, respecting the fact that somebody's been a paid employee of District 8 for X number of years. Where do they integrate into the City of Bellingham? What are their recommendations on where they fall with the City of Bellingham's contract with respect to longevity, various other benefits? And so the State Council has seen some mergers, acquisitions, annexations, contracts for services in the past, and so the State Council assisted both of the units in developing that and protecting the interests of both of those units.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got just a couple questions in terms of bringing the firefighters into to become employees of the city. In terms of pension commitments, of previous years and their pension commitments, do we assume that?
So all of the 8 employees that will be coming over are currently in the LEF 2 system. There are no LEF 1 employees that will be coming over. Good. So I think that might have been the basis of some of your question there.
I wasn't sure how.
Yes. And so we, as the city, will pick up their contributions just as we would any new employee coming into the fire department and in the current LEF 2 system.
And with the agreement the way it is, District 8 will continue to receive funds from the citizens in their area that will come forward to the city that will help pay for those employees.
Right now, the Fire District 8 operates with a fire levy as well as a maintenance and operations levy, and that was recently put in place to be able to provide some sustainable and stable staffing for Fire District 8. And one of the evaluations was to explore this continued contract with the city. So they'll receive their revenue under those two. And then there'll be quarterly, is the way we're kind of structuring it, quarterly a payment over to the city. That would be comprehensive of all the salary benefits, interfund, et cetera.
Great. Yes, April.
So I'm interested in the part where they're going to be keeping their volunteer program, their community-based volunteer program. So my understanding is that District 8 will be serving, it looks like part of my ward, Ward 1. And so currently the level of service, the expectation is that I'm part of a fire department that has a really high expectation for the service that they provide in the education. So would this mean then I might be being serviced by a volunteer versus being serviced by somebody from Medic 1, or how will that work?
No, your service level will remain current as it is today, if not more enhanced. And when I say enhanced, it would be because of the ability for more stable staffing. So out of Station 31, what we envision is 2 career positions on a crew at that station with 1 volunteer position. And then out at Station 34, we'll have a career officer and then 2 volunteer positions. Any of the volunteer positions, as the draft contract and MOU exists today, any of the volunteer positions, if they are unable to be filled by volunteer staff, can be filled by career staff. And that's one of the enhancements right now that District 8 just does not have the depth in the number of folks. And although we rely on a volunteer program in District 8, it becomes more difficult with the number of volunteers that they have in the program. So your level of service in your ward will continue as it is today, and that's stated in the contract. And if for any reason the district commissioners feel that that level of service has changed, they have the right to have discussion with the City of Bellingham about their perceived changes and rectification.
Okay.
Anything else?
I do have one more question.
Yes.
So the capital facilities that are in District 8, that it sounded like we're going to be getting this $1.4 million will be coming from District 8 to help. So if what I understood is we're going to have to be helping take care of some of their capital facilities. So I was wondering if that's correct. What are we making sure that when they're coming in, like right now, the county has brought them up to well-working, they don't need a lot of infrastructure changes, or are we going to have to be doing some improvements right off the bat?
Real good question. The 1.4 million, that approximate amount, is for an operating budget. District 8 will retain their capital facilities and the apparatus, and they will also retain their capital facilities plan. That will not be transferred over to the city.
Okay, so I think I just have one more. So
The city coordinates the maintenance, just as we do today. Myself and the administrative staff of the Bellingham Fire Department serves as the administrative staff for Fire District 8. And so as it exists today, we're responsible for coordinating and administering the station maintenance and the District 8 capital facilities plan. That will remain the same.
I think my concern is that the types of equipment that our fire department has might differ, and we might have to improve and upgrade things if we're expecting it to run at the same level of service. And is that going to be are we expecting that cost? Are we paying attention to that?
I don't think it's going to be an unintended consequence or expense. We have paid attention to that.
Okay.
District 8 is operating with some very new apparatus. They have an engine that's just getting ready to be delivered. They have a brand new aid car that just got delivered.
Oh, great.
Their facilities certainly are at a different state than the cities, but by retaining those in the district, it does not become a city obligation.
Okay. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief. I look forward to seeing the final agreement coming before us and the future updates with it. And so, our next item is an ordinance regarding the administration of a donation made for the assistance of the families of firefighters who have lost their lives or been killed, especially in the line of duty. So, I'm assuming Chief again.
Back on deck again, Bill Newbold Fire Department. And what we have in front of you is an ordinance that's requesting the Mayor Kelly to be able to be entering into a contract to transfer the money that was provided to the city through a donation over to a benevolent foundation that's been set up by the Bellingham and Whatcom County firefighters. And we were approached as far as being able to utilize this donation and then to direct it over to the Benevolent Fund and the board, the Firefighter Assistance Board, which was made up in the city of Bellingham between the fire chief, the finance director, the HR director, and a representative from Local 106. All met and considered the request that was put in front of us to transfer the amount of money over there. And we think it's really a good transfer. One of the defined objectives of the benevolent 501c3 is almost verbatim, word for word, which was the request of the donor that made the $37,000 donation. And so we feel that the Benevolent Fund has a network far greater than what was envisioned as the Firefighter Assistance Board, a network far greater to be able to handle the requests and what is best practice for fulfilling some of the requests that come forward to the assistance of families firefighters who may have lost their lives, particularly in the line of duty.
Yes, Roxanne.
Well, this is just a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and I just wanted to express sincere and devout appreciation for the donation, and I really support the use of this funding in this way, which is why I'm happy to move the ordinance regarding the administration of a donation made for the assistance of the families of firefighters who have lost their lives or been killed, especially in the line of duty.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion before us. Any comments? Yes, I couldn't agree with you more on your sentiments with that. And so, seeing no more comments, all those in favor of recommending approval tonight, answer aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you, Chief. And we will recommend approval tonight. The next item before us is residential solid waste collection update. And so Ted Carlson will be presenting, I believe.
Good morning.
Morning, Ted.
Good morning. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department, along with Eric Johnston, Assistant Public Works Director. As Terry mentioned, we have 2 items related to solid waste today. Both of them are information only with perhaps some direction from council on what your thoughts might be and a confirmation that we're heading in the right direction. The first one relates to the residential solid waste collection contract with Sanitary Service. We had some discussion about this back in 2014 as part of the budget process and some ongoing discussion. We have extended our contract with Sanitary Service. We're happy to have them be our hauler for years to come. And that contract anticipated several changes that we might see in the collection service as we move forward in hopes to better support some of the city's overarching goals related to climate action, other environmental issues that we're working on. So I have a couple of those that I'd like to provide an update on today. First off, the contract anticipated a conversion of the collection fleet that serves the city of Bellingham from diesel to compressed natural gas. We've had a lot of discussion about that within the city. One of the items in the city's climate action plan relates to municipal fleet. And it's an area that we hope to make more and more improvement, something that we need to do much better, reducing the emission from the city's fleet. We've certainly added some electric vehicles and tried to reduce the number of fleet over the years, but we're excited at the possibility of switching several of the collection vehicles from diesel to natural gas. So there's a significant reduction in emissions, about 25%. Some studies are suggesting in terms of the emission from the truck. And some other benefits as well, notably they're much quieter, about a 60% reduction in noise, which, as you know, with the collection fleet can be an issue. So both of those items, I think, align well with the climate action plan and other environmental legacy statements that the council and the city have adopted over time. Historically, the compressed natural gas had a financial benefit as well, and I think we'll probably see that moving forward. But with the reduction in the price of diesel fuel at this point, there's not as much of a financial savings in the cost of compressed natural gas. But obviously, diesel prices are subject to change, and I think will probably increase. And so along with the environmental benefit, we'll see a financial benefit moving forward of lower fuel prices. So we've been working with Sanitary Service on this issue. There's a few things that have to happen. They need to build a filling station. Right now there's not a compressed natural gas filling station that's in this area and available for that. So Sanitary Service has been anticipating this for some time. They've done some renovations at their yard related to stormwater and other infrastructure, and at that time they anticipated building a fuel station, so some of the work has been done. They'll have to construct the station and then start converting the fleet from diesel to compressed natural gas. So obviously there's a cost that comes along with that. We've anticipated that. And with that, and through discussions with Sanitary Service, initially we're looking at a 2.5% rate increase that would start this year. We did pretty well last year in terms of keeping costs down. A lot of that had to do with the lower fuel costs. So we have some money, about $260,000 that it has been built up in what we call a rate stabilization fund. So that allows us to use that money in an effort to pay for some costs moving forward and keeping rates as low as we can. There hasn't been an adjustment to the Sanitary Service rate for a couple of years now, so we felt like a 2.5% adjustment this year, certainly to get some of the benefits from the compressed natural gas made sense. So that rate increase would take effect May 1st of this year. So I think it's something that we're very excited about moving forward with, and certainly would like to answer any questions that the council would have about the conversion to compressed natural gas, what the benefits might be, and anything else you might be interested in.
Okay, committee, questions? What?
I'll go.
Okay.
So, one, thank you for all the work that you've done, and of course for SSC, and they've showed that they're very climate-minded, and I really do appreciate that. I think sometimes there can be unintended consequences whenever we make climate action policy. And we don't look at equity and the unintended consequences of people who might be overburdened by some of the things that we do that cause more expense. So one of those in this is it completely makes sense for us to, if you just look at across as following our policy, to mandate the Food Plus and give that opportunity to everybody. However, with the 2.5 increase and the constant increase we've seen in some of our utilities, I don't know if we're quite ready for this yet. And I personally would like to hear from the community on if they feel like we're ready, all of our community is ready to have that another burden. And we're going to be coming up with more as we talk about this level of service and how we're going to find new revenues. So I'm interested in the feedback that you've gone out and tried to get from the community regarding this, and if there is more opportunity to talk about this one before we mandate it across the board.
Yeah, I think the mayor would like to speak to it as well. Are you, I thought I heard you say Food Plus in there. Are you talking about the conversion of the fleet, or did you move on to the second item?
I did a positive, negative, so I complimented you on the one, and then I went right into the one so I'm talking about the Food Plus.
Okay, yeah, so that's great. Yeah, we certainly would like to get plenty of feedback on the second item, and maybe I can give a little bit of background on that second item. On the conversion of the fleet, that decision has been made administratively, and I feel like we certainly had the support. We talked about it at times in budget discussions, but that direction has been given to Sanitary Service to move forward on the CNG.
Okay.
The second item that Councilmember Barker talked about was the discussion about including the Food Plus program, so that's the curbside organic, as part of the base rate, part of the base service that you receive as a Sanitary Service residential customer, similar to recycling right now. And that's a discussion that we've been having with Sanitary Service. It was certainly identified in our contract extension as something that we should be looking at. The countywide solid waste comprehensive plan, which is underway right now, it's done, identified organics in the waste stream as really the next best option to increase diversion from the landfill, and really the place to do it at the curbside, so at the collection side of it. So we've been considering, kind of in conjunction with the closure of Clean Green, wanting to make sure that there's opportunity for everybody to deal with their organics, both their yard waste and their food scraps, the possibility of including that in the base rate. There's a financial impact of doing that. And right now, if you're a residential customer and you participate in Food Plus, it's $8 a month. That's added to your fee. We looked at the possibility of making that mandatory or included in your base rate across all of the City of Bellingham's customers. If you do that, there's some efficiencies. You get some economies of scale, and that cost would likely go down a little bit for folks that are already participating, perhaps down to something like $5 a month. But it would be an additional cost to folks that aren't currently in the program. We recognize that. That's a cost to the customers. We have been seeing an increase in the participation of Food Plus. I don't have the numbers on the increase in customers, but I do know that the tonnage, so what's been brought out to Green Earth Technology as part of the Food Plus program, went up almost 10% in 2015. It's about 9.75%. So we are seeing, at least through that data, increased usage, and I would anticipate with the closure of Clean Green that number may go up anyway. But yes, we absolutely would like to get some feedback from council. That's one of the reasons we brought that item. That decision has not been made absolute. We talked about if we did want to move forward with that, it wouldn't be something that would be put in place until the growing season of 2017. Sanitary Service will certainly need some time to buy the toters and make sure that they have the ability to handle that increased participation. But we have time to have that discussion. If council felt like there was another way that you would like to go, we certainly would like to have that discussion.
Yeah. I have to agree with April on this one. I think it's a great service if you want it. But again, April has been making some great points, and I have to agree with. People are bumping up at the limits of increases. we've seen major increases in water, and there's nothing you can do about it because you can't cut back on water usage because it's going up anyway, even with the reduction of it. This is one way people can still keep from incurring that increased cost. I know there are a lot of people like me that we compost almost everything and try to reuse back into our gardens, into other things. And, you know, for those starting out with lower income jobs, these increases of, I know for some people $5 a month, $8 a month increases doesn't sound like much, but when you're already stretched, every dollar is already committed to just making your rent and basic things. And for those on the other end, like my age, there's an awful lot of people in Bellingham that are sitting on fixed incomes. Those incomes are not going up. Social Security isn't giving any increase this year. So an increase of $8 a month, $5 a month impacts that ability, you know, of people to, you know, make their rent, to make their medical bills and things. So I think we really have to be conscious of that. And I know every time we say it's only $5 a month, that's, you know, that's a latte. Well, that's fine, but if you can't afford the latte, you know, you drink a regular cup of coffee. And so I think I would much prefer that this be continued to be offered as a service, but not make it mandatory. And yes, April.
I think if we were to go that route, one, it would be great to get input, but also to actively seek input from those that are living. I know I brought up in the retreat, the ALICE study of United Way, those that are living at the poverty line, but those that aren't receiving a lot of subsidy, that whenever you take all the things out and the cost of living and they're not getting any subsidies, that they're also living at that line. And that's 42% of Whatcom County. So I think it would be good to go in and really try to get some feedback from that community. If you educate on the benefits and that could possibly keep us from having rises, maybe they would choose to do that. Maybe it's going to need to be based on maybe there's some equity in there, that if you're at that 42%, you know, or lower, that you might get this subsidized a bit, and if you're not, it might be different. Just different ways to look at it. So whenever we look at these climate impacts and these changes that we're going to want to do that are going to cost us money, we're really being mindful of those. I mean, like renters where trash is already paid. I mean, we do all these little things that, like a rental registration. It's just a little bit of a cost, and then it's just a little bit of cost for Food Plus, and it's just a little bit of a 2.5 increase for, you know, collection, and all of these things really do start to add up. So for me, I would want to hear from the public before I decided to mandate something.
Mayor?
Yeah, and I think obviously if we have, as we're going through our level of service and budget discussion, I agree with the point you're making. I have been concerned since day one, being the mayor, of the cumulative effect of everything we've added just in the last 4 years that I've been here. And I think that there's some really good goals and legacies and strategic commitments that this council and past councils have adopted that drive some of these decisions. When staff comes back to you with this, they're not coming back because, oh, they just thought this would be a great idea. They're coming back because the council has adopted strategies and legacies and goals that we are trying to address. I think the issue of affordability is something that should be added in, but I don't think that it should just center around this. When we were talking a little bit at the retreat, and Michael's not here, but he had brought up the issue of cumulative effect, which was music to my ears. I think that in this level of service discussion, we should look at the policies we've adopted that drive the fees and the taxes and the other things that we're asking people to pay. And in other instances, we have looked at how to subsidize for, lower income people, or how maybe the city would take on a certain amount of the cost, and it wouldn't mean necessarily a complete cost recovery system. Those are kind of options that we can bring forward in the level of service discussion, and I would really appreciate it if the council, since this is not imminent, if the council would let us have that cumulative effect discussion and determine if this is a better expense that we or the citizens should incur, and not others that we have now that we might be able to reduce or make different. So I think the feedback is important, and if we're doing it through the budget and through the level of service, we will have opportunities for the public to testify on the budget and other things. We can have public hearings whenever we want, which I think is a fair way to do this, because then everybody gets to hear the public comments, everybody gets to hear the responses, and it may spur other people to want to come and give their opinion. So I guess that's the process I'd request that we use.
Roxanne and then April.
Well, and I'll accept some responsibility for how this has developed, because I have asked SSC and our public works staff if we could please at some point have a bin for our garbage and a bin for yard waste as a part of the service, because that's what I'm used to in other jurisdictions, and that would help with, the management of all the stuff from my own property and many properties. So I definitely, had an impact on this, it seems like. But I think I agree with you, Mayor. There's time for us to explore this with our community. We can gather the community input, because I want to hear as many voices as possible as to what will work out for our neighborhoods and our people.
April?
Well, one, I do want to thank you guys, and when you bring things forward and I'm asking questions, I hopefully you don't think that I'm discounting what you brought forward in any way. It's just something, as I was sitting over there, it was this continued theme that I felt like sometimes wasn't being, we weren't highlighting as much as it might need to, especially with those people that are living in Bellingham that are really suffering at this point in their single-family homes, just trying to make the mortgage. So, or even being able to find a rental at that point. So, so thank you. And I hope whenever I ask a question, you don't think I'm poking at you a bit. But I did wonder, since there is, it looks like there's time for a negotiation even after we've made the contract. I know the dog waste and litter has been a real issue, and adding dog waste stations is not the expense necessarily as somebody that's coming and maintaining those. So there's a lot of areas with trails that are right on roads where sanitation is already coming by to collect, and I wondered if that's a discussion that's being had in this and that might be coming forward, that we could make that partnership so we're not having to overburden parks, and we're not just telling people, well, we don't have a place for you to put these things, but we think you should be picking them up.
Well, that's a discussion. The pet waste discussion is one that is occurring within the city staff at this point. So Parks is looking at providing some level of service. So how many pet waste stations should we have, what the locations are. At some point, we'll have to have the discussion once that standard is set, how are we going to pay for. If Parks is overburdened and can't do it, then likely Public Works can't do it either. But if we ask Sanitary Service to do it, there's a cost to do that. So that's the discussion we're certainly having, and happy to do that. We recognize that there is some demand for that in the neighborhood. So Parks and Public Works are going to come up with a strategy, and then we'll engage the community and Sanitary Service if that's the way we decide to go. I would, and I do appreciate the feedback. That's why we brought this issue forward, because we anticipated that council would have some good feedback on the Food Plus discussion. So that's absolutely appropriate and exactly what we needed. We'll take that back and have discussions amongst ourselves and figure out a public outreach strategy and incorporate it into the budget discussions. There's one thing that folks will that we'll have to consider as we move forward. The hope is that if we do have more participation in Food Plus and people are putting their organics into a Food Plus bin rather than into their solid waste bin, over time, perhaps they can reduce the frequency of their solid waste pickup or the size of their container. And that's one way to reduce the cost or perhaps mitigate the cost of increased Food Plus service, more challenging for people that have the lowest level of service. So if somebody has monthly pickup now, or is a self-hauler or whatever, and they're still required to have the base fee, then it's hard for them to mitigate. But those are the discussions we need to have as part of the education process, and we're happy to do that. So thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and I'm more than willing, Mayor, to have that discussion as part of a larger discussion, but it was raised today because this is what's before us, and we don't want decisions, I don't want decisions made without further discussions about this, and just assuming that the council is okay with it, because some of us at this point, you know, want to look at ways that we can keep a lid on some of these costs, and by
And
conserving.
I only raised that,
Yeah.
Terry, because if
No, that's
you
fine.
didn't want to make a decision today, which is fine
Yeah.
with us, I thought I heard the comment made about, I'd rather not do this, and I would really rather.
That's my feeling right now, unless I
No,
get in
but
a lot
to
of
let
other.
us
Yeah.
talk to the council about all the options
Yeah.
before you decide that going with mandatory
Yeah.
pickup is not something we want to do. Because it sounds like the cost and the fairness are the issues that you've raised today, which, as Ted said, are very legitimate, and we need to know them early rather than late. So thank you very much
Yeah.
for your
And as long
feedback.
as Public Works doesn't need an answer right now, I think it's fine with me.
Yeah.
I know,
Well,
but,
that's what we're
but on
providing,
this one,
is
yeah.
information.
Okay, anything else on this?
Yeah, I've learned a lot being on council, especially about the idea of the costs at pickup, and if we're to do some curbside sorting, that it can help in the long runs. But I wasn't as familiar with that, even in all the watching of council meetings things. So I think that could be a great part of the education discussion if we are going to ask for public input, to really help people understand that, and then what you were just saying, that long term where we could maybe avoid these increases. So I would just suggest maybe a refresher on why we're looking at doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else on this item? Okay, then let's move on to the next item, the solid waste disposal contract update.
Thank you. So this is the other aspect of our collection process, our solid waste process. Previously, we talked about collection. This is the disposal side. The city has an agreement that deals with where our residential solid waste is taken. That agreement expires at the end of April. We've anticipated going through a request for proposal process to identify a new disposal site or a new disposal agreement. And so we've hired a consultant to help us with the process. We're seeking input on the RFP. It's not gone out. It was in your packet in draft form, and it's been sent out to folks within the community, and we're receiving comments and feedback. I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's been working with our consultant on this, and he'll kind of walk through the process and identify the areas where we'd like to get some council input at this time.
Thank you, Ted, and members of the council. So the comment about the implementation of policy and effects to ratepayers is very apt and on point for the solid waste disposal contract as well, because the disposal cost, which is paid not by the city or by residents of the city, but is paid by the hauler, SSC, is passed on to the customer. So how we choose to arrange the contract, or what we choose to contract for, will have a direct impact to some degree on the ratepayers themselves. So recognizing that there needed to be a balance between the cost for disposal and implementation of council policies, the RFP draft document was crafted with the help of a local consulting firm to try to balance some of those features out. And our intent today is was to share that RFP with the council and to the public, and to provide get some feedback on how we have weighted the selection criteria for choosing the residential disposal contract hauler. So the question is really weighted or geared towards what importance we place on various elements of disposal. And there are certainly a wide range of opinions as to what we should include with the disposal contract, from simply taking the least cost option and sending it to the landfill, to doing full sorting and disposal and removing everything that we can out of the waste stream. And our attempt here with this RFP is to try to find a balance between those two points. If you were to keep what we have now, or maybe to one extreme, rely fully on the privatized industry within Whatcom County for solid waste and not have a contract, that has probably the highest potential to get the lowest rate, because that would do is it would put two or 3 private enterprises against each other, and the market would drive that price down. To the extreme end, stipulating a contract which places the importance on sorting at the facility or high importance on greenhouse gas emission or transportation costs, then that would result in a single party and having a higher investment in infrastructure to implement that policy. And so by choosing what we have chosen or proposing in this RFP to find a balance between the transportation costs, the security of the long-term landfill itself, as well as some aspects of the council's goal or the city's goals for energy reduction and greenhouse gas emissions, we're trying to find that balance point, recognizing that there is a gap that was currently paid by SSE for residential waste disposal is slightly higher than the market, that there's a potential there to see some benefits without much of an increase to customers. So the RFP process will help evaluate that, but clearly we're putting a greater emphasis on the cost than we are some of the other elements. So if I could call your attention, please, in the RFP to page 49 and 50. This is in your packet. In section 7, there's a list of evaluation criteria. On page 50, evaluation criteria specifically E, F, G, and H. Obviously, they need to submit a number of copies and need to sign the proposal, but in category number F, G, and H specifically, this is getting to where the material is being hauled to and how that will that be done in a responsible manner over the long term. Key to this is we're choosing to contract with the owner of the landfill as opposed to the owner of the entity getting the material from Whatcom County down to these 2 landfill facilities. From our review of the market out there, that the landfills that are operating in Washington and Oregon that are currently receiving waste from the city of Bellingham, they are all essentially operating on an even playing field. They're very heavily regulated by the Department of Ecology and by the federal government. They all have elements that incorporate energy production. They all have elements for long-term projection, long-term use and capacity. These are facilities that are projected to be in use for the next 100+ years as they are currently permitted. And all of them have reserve areas that are not permitted that would allow them to operate many, many years into the future. So from a level playing field, the landfills themselves, at our current look at them, are very capable of dealing with our waste in a very responsible manner. But we are interested mostly in making sure that we are contracting with the owner of the landfill to ensure that that waste is going to a place with some security for the long term, not just for today's operations, but long-term permitting capacity and then financial capability to ensure that that facility can continue to operate. So that's categories F, G, and H. As part of the evaluation process, that we then have other categories that are become optional. And this is where the respondents can choose to respond to the minimum criteria, but can go beyond the minimum criteria proposed to things that they might be of benefit to the city, their community, in a competitive fashion. In responding to an RFP, it is not based solely on price, but it is based on other elements that the community chooses to be important. So on page 51, it's got another table there. It has qualifications, operational, financial, and then competitive, or excuse me, service fees that break down different elements of the extras beyond just getting the material to a landfill. In qualifications, this is getting to, is the firm capable and qualified to do what we want them to do? Have they done this before, essentially? We don't want to start up somebody who's never done this before being the first guy out of the gate. We want somebody with a long track record of responsibly managing our solid waste. The operational section captures a couple of things. First of all, it captures how is the material transported. Is it transported by rail, by truck, by mule cart? How is it transported from Whatcom County down to eastern Washington? And the majority of the waste in Whatcom County goes to 2 landfills, one in Roosevelt, Washington, the other in Arlington, Oregon. They're on the Columbia River. You go to the middle of nowhere and turn left, and they're out in just the sticks. No offense to our friends in eastern Washington, but it's a long ways away, but essentially the same place. So there's several hundred miles that our waste is transported by truck and train. And so how that material gets transported has a big influence on our energy footprint. If it's by truck or train, then there's a difference in the energy consumed to get that material from point A to point B. So that's captured in that category A. The greenhouse gas emission reduction is also important to us, how that material is managed and what efforts the landfills are doing to capture greenhouse gases or produce energy from emissions that are generated by the landfill. That's covered in that operational section. That's a total of 20 points out of 100, so it's 20% of the total scoring criteria. The financial security, making sure that the company is viable and will be viable for a very long time. These are the companies that run these landfills in the state of Washington are very large corporate conglomerates, throughout, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and they're very large companies. We want to make sure that they are viable and will last for the very long-term future. The last category, and one that is 55% of the overall scoring criteria, is what we call the service fee, the completeness, reasonableness, and competitiveness. And this gets to price. And so you can see pretty quickly that we have about 20% of the scoring criteria ranked on the reliability, the redundancy, the energy footprint, the greenhouse gas emission reduction, but about 55% based on the cost of disposal. And that's trying to find that balance between pushing policy forward on energy or climate footprint or diversion aspects versus price and influences to our customers. And certainly there's more technical information than we have time to go into today, but our intent is to really get some feedback and some information from the council specifically today, as well as the public and members of the industry as to whether we have got those criteria correct or if we need to weight them a different way. Do we want to put environmental footprint above price or vice versa, or do we want to minimize one or the other? That's the implementation of the policy comes to council for your input on are we doing that in a way that is reflective of what the council policy and direction has been. I think that's all I have to say about that.
So again, this is draft. This is part of the process of getting some feedback, understanding it's a lot to go through. Eric, I think our schedule is we'd like to get feedback over what period of time?
So we've asked, when we sent this RFP out to every member of the county's Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and have asked for comments written back from those entities by April 29th, so end of next week. Certainly that can be shared with any member of the public. If they have input or comments, they can send that to me directly. There's not a formal comment period like we had for a permitting action, but just as a courtesy to the city to get this ready and implemented. Our goal is to try to have the RFP out by the middle, if not the end of May. So we have some time to work through the process for sure.
So the reason I had him bring that up is that today's not your only opportunity to provide us feedback. We know it's a lot of information. You might want to take some time to look at it. Certainly can follow up with Eric or I, send us an email, give us a call. We're happy to come back again. But we wanted to introduce this. We do have a schedule. We want to move it forward, so we are anxious to get it out. But as Eric said, early, mid to late May, so there's some time. So if you're not prepared today knowing that you just got it, to provide feedback, that's okay too. We can get feedback over the next couple weeks from you as well.
Okay. Committee. Roxanne?
Just a suggestion and curiosity. For example, could we take some points possibly away from competitiveness and add it to greenhouse gas emission reduction? That's just something that I'm seeing is, I'm really high on the greenhouse gas emission side of it, and it just seems so low with just 2 points.
Yeah, that's exactly the feedback we're looking for. I think the 2 points, that whole operational section, the 20, and Eric can correct me, but that 20 points has some relation to how they handle the material, the greenhouse gas at the landfill itself, I think, as 2 points, but the transportation to get it there. So, for instance, rail versus truck or some combination of it is considered in there as well. But that's exactly what we're looking for, that balance. So thank you. We can look at that number.
April?
Yeah. In the operations, I read through here and I was interested in, I guess, how are we weighting, or are we even looking at the company's active role in seeking environmental best practices? So how active are they in seeing what's out there and how can we change and adapt? So is that would be in operations. I was wondering where that might be weighted in that.
So if I understand, it's how is the company being forward-thinking in their operational practices to be ready for the future?
Yeah.
I would put that into their qualifications. In what have they done in the past and what are they continuing to do in the future? What are they looking into? For example, one of the landfills that we visited has a system to capture gas off of the landfill and produce that into power. That's only run for 6 months out of the year when they're selling power to California. They're looking at ways to put that natural gas onto the distribution system and have it not be producing power at the site, but adding the natural gas, once it can be cleaned to a higher level, added to the pipeline system on the system. So how forward-thinking is the company would be into their qualification section as well.
Great.
And, yeah, I think we, do have to have a balance in it, because this goes back to the discussion we were just having again. I think it's really important that we look at the overall the footprint, the carbon footprint with this. I think the transportation methods do make a big difference. It's not only in terms of the carbon footprint of the difference between train and trucks. It's also looking at taking those extra trucks off the highway, because we're bumping up against that in terms of transportation costs, road costs, just the congestion in general. And so I think that's really important that we have that. But that said, we also, the cost for our individuals, we can have all the greatest ideals in the world, but if people can't afford it, they can't afford it, and so I think we got to make sure we have a balance with it. And I think with our goals, and other stuff with the city, we do look at that. We understand that a good percent of our population is lower income, and that has to be a consideration when we're moving this forward. And so, I do agree that it's got to be that balance, and I'm not exactly sure which one. For me, this kind of looks okay.
Yeah, so that's that we appreciate that. Right now, about 55 points out of the 100 are related specifically to the service fee. There's other financial components in there as it more relates to the company's viability and things of that nature, but maybe that's a number to look at and consider as it relates to some of the other aspects that are a combination of best practice from an environmental perspective, reduction of greenhouse gas, but also long-term viability of the company and the landfill itself. So
yeah, but it can't be just cost, because we just don't want it dumped in some ravine down the road, and as used to be done. Yes.
So I did want to, I guess, compliment you all on the F, G, and H and the evaluation criteria, where you're really thinking beyond just how is it impacting us here in the county, but you're thinking about where is it going, how is that practice, and then how are we getting there. And I think that's part of that I really, really appreciate when you guys are bringing things forward. You've thought those out. I did wonder where, or if we could require, this is where my newness will come out, in qualifications and operations, how does this company, are they local hire? Do they give living wage jobs? Do they have opportunity to be part of a union? Are those things that we can require in an RFP, or is that something that isn't a council decision?
If I might, so the question comes down to a very similar question we have addressed or talked about many times, is local preference for local contractors, and that's a difficult one to get after.
Okay.
So how do you provide, say, we'd be happy to have any contractor apply for it, but if you have a business which happens to be in this location, you're at a greater advantage. That can be a difficult thing to capture. How the company chooses to run its business, and that's part of the qualifications perspective in my mind, is the quality of the company and how that company operates and does business, is an important thing, but would hesitate to give preference to a company based on geographic location, or necessarily what we would term to be local jobs or not local jobs. Regardless of who we end up contracting with, both of the current transfer facilities have local employees and have local union jobs that they offer to their employees. And there will be differences in how that material is dealt with. Key to that, though, is who we're choosing to contract with. We're choosing to put the RFP out not with the local transfer facility operator, but with the end receiving landfill owner. And so how that company chooses to respond to that as a nationwide company versus the local transfer facility will be a difficult thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah, Amy Cram, Legal Department. So when we put this RFP out, there won't be any restrictions about geographics. It needs to be open to whoever wants to respond.
Okay. Anything else at this time? Yes, Roxanne.
Forgive me if this was said, but could you go over the process of how council will be able to see some of the applications and what that process would look like generally?
Yeah, so really on an RFP, it's not like a bid, public work, where we bring the bid to council for council's award. On an RFP, it's administrative, and so the council's role is really on the upfront side, giving us some input on what policies are important to you so we can craft an RFP that we think reflects the direction we've given from council. Once we put it out for RFP, we get the proposals, it becomes administrative, and it's really, we're trying to keep council informed as we move forward. We would keep council informed if we were unable to negotiate a contract, if we didn't get any viable applicants, things like that. But the actual approval process becomes administrative at that point.
And could I just add that
This has been a waste of time.
that I haven't actually talked to Ted about this, but because there are 3 of you here, and there's a whole council that's going to deal with this,
Yeah.
it may be good to use your input and then come up with 1 or 2 or 3 options that show the proportion of the things that you've brought up. So the environmental with the financial, that kind of thing, so that we've listened to what you said, and you have an opportunity to pick something that meets the policy goals that you've established, instead of us just bringing you one and saying, this is the one we have for you. And I don't know if you'd like that better or not, because it's more work. But when I was a legislator in the policy world, I liked options, because then I could have listened to everybody who was giving me input, and then based on the goals that the city's adopted, I could use that input to pick whichever option seemed to meet the goals the best. So I don't know if you want us to go through that extra step. Like I said, I haven't talked to Ted and Eric about this, so surprise.
You're the mayor.
Yes. April, you had a...
Unless you want to continue on that. Oh,
I thought you...
I'll wait till I have their full attention before I speak.
Okay.
Okay. Under evaluation process, and this may go back to what you were just saying, that an RFP, then it stays strictly within administration, but it says that the proposals will be evaluated based on evaluation committee consisting of city staff. Are there ever times where we do something like this, but we have other stakeholders in, like our resources or sustainable connections, that might be able to give some feedback on proposal?
There are times when we do RFPs, and we do RFPs all the time. We enter into service contracts all the time, and they're administrative in nature. We do bring outside people to help us on the committees at times, and that may be something that we want to do in this particular instance as well. So it's certainly something we can think about.
Yeah, I think for a lot of these, just because my level of education is not very high on any of this, and I'm on a pretty steep learning curve, but those are 2 organizations that I think have people within that are doing a lot of work, and those are their specialties. And for me, a lot of the things that I've brought up, if I knew they might be stakeholders in the proposal process, it might help with some of my questions.
Sometimes in bringing stakeholders into it, though, you also have to look at how you're balancing the stakeholders.
Yeah.
If you're bringing in a primarily an environmental-oriented group to set on it, going in, it's going to be weighted in a certain way. If you're looking at cost, what group do you bring in that represents the equity champion, opportunity council or whatever. So in these kind of things where we're looking at striking a balance, that's always has to be the issue. I do know with this, I do think what I would like to see is that, for this to come back to the committee, so we can take time to get more input from the community. I know you've already sent out information out to some of the stakeholders, so you'll be getting input from that, and then we can get input from the larger council and come back. I don't know if we want to, and this is up to us, I guess, on the mayor's idea about bringing back options with that, or do we want to just go with what we have and take input from the community as we go forward? And so we'll throw that out to committee. Yes, Mayor.
So a couple things. First of all, I have found that our staff is nonpartisan.
Right.
They're supposed to be the facts only, ma'am, people, or sir, depending on who the mayor is. So I trust them to be very objective. Some of the times what I have seen in other groups that I've worked on in this arena is that the people that are brought in from the outside have a certain area of expertise that is not necessarily advocacy based. So a financial person who could look at the RFP and look at the financial area and say, oh, yeah, I agree what, these guys and Brian Henshaw came up with sounds good. Or, like one step away. But we could, obviously, we've sent the RFP out to get some input from the community. Maybe we could broaden who we've sent it out to. I don't know if it went to environmental groups or the chamber or the Opportunity Council, things like that. It sounds like a little outside some of those people's areas, but it would be an opportunity to give feedback to us without holding up a process that we want, obviously, to be concluded so that we can move forward with a good, hauling or disposal system. Eric?
If I might just, it's also important that remember that SSC, our hauler, has a key role to play in this as well. So their input, because who we choose to contract with will have a direct impact on their operations. And so the trying to find someone who's got the experience and knowledge base of the industry within the county, who are not directly affected by the contract or indirectly affected by the contract is a bit of a challenge. But certainly involvement of our partners over at SSC would be critically important, and they would bring that knowledge and resource and import to bear on that. But echoing the mayor's comments, the selection criteria is made up of folks from the purchasing office whose job it is to make sure that we are fair and impartial, from the city attorney's office who's making sure that we're following the law and don't go too far afoul of what we need to be doing, and then public works professionals, myself and other folks. We also, when we hired a consultant to do the RFP to develop this, we specifically sought out a consultant, and we're fortunate to find one here in Bellingham. Mr. Justin Clarice, I think, is still here, whose company does not do business with local companies involved in the industry. So they do not have current contracts with either Republic or Waste Management, which allows them to be somewhat impartial as to how this is developed, and we'll certainly rely on their professional judgment as well.
Anything else?
I think just back to your question, for me, I don't know if I necessarily need options. You guys, typically we give you some suggestions, and many times you implement them, and I feel pretty confident with that. I think any other council members, I know Michael's already, and I found it very helpful. I did get some of the public comments, and so I could read through those and then see. So hopefully people might CC us on some of those that they feel pretty strongly about. And when you bring it, I would like to see it one more time.
Right.
Personally, if that's possible, but not necessarily with a lot of different options that we have to pick and choose from, but maybe just with what your interpretation was of our comments. And then to Roxanne's delight, I'm sure I only have one more question when you're ready, Terry. And it just goes to the, so my predecessor had some concerns in, I know that there's two types of contracts here, right? There's disposal and collections, and that when those were coming up to council, if they did want to make some changes or take a look at that. And I noticed that, I think on this one, it said 20 years. Is that what it said, that it would come back in 20? Reviewed by council.
The intent is for a 20-year contract with this disposal.
Yeah, and so at that point, does it come back up, or is that something that staff can just go ahead and continue forward with? does it come back to council, maybe have these discussions again? Or is it at your guys' discretion whether you want to continue the contract and what kind of changes you want to make?
Yeah, I think that would likely depend on the circumstances, but it could. Sometimes we extend contracts. Sometimes contracts need to go back out. I think it would depend. Certainly would anticipate it would come back to council in prior to 20 years for feedback, but I don't think there would be a legal requirement that it couldn't be extended. I don't know, Amy?
Right.
It would depend what we wrote into the contract in terms of whether extensions were prohibited. They could be prohibited. If not prohibited, then they would be allowed, and unless something changed with the state of the law. But I think that 20 years is a while for a disposal contract, and things in the industry may change, and
Yeah.
I would expect that staff would come back.
I have a confidence, especially in the current staff, of what you guys are able to do and the way that you listen. Of course, for me, it's, never knowing what's going to happen in 20 years. And I know with Jack, with some of the other contracts, there was some frustration for him that those contracts were being continued without coming back to council. So I don't know if that's something council might want to have in there so that if things have changed, the body that is being elected by the public has an opportunity to discuss whether the contract would be negotiated again or changed or would have some input. So I don't know if that's something we could get back to you. I'm sure I would ask other council members that maybe that if that's something we'd like to stick in there, it might be a little addition. And
Yes.
then I'm done.
Mayor?
Yeah, just for a little clarification, we did extend SSC's contract because of the performance of the company, not for any other reason but that.
Yeah.
And there was discussion during the budgeting process, and the majority of the council supported doing what we did. So not always do all council members agree. So I just wanted to make sure you knew this was not something the administration, didn't share with the council, or that the council didn't nod their head and say, yes, we think this is good, because I think the council had the same experience that the cities had with the hauler. Few complaints, not none, but few complaints, and then they're regulated by the state as far as their commercial.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't mean to imply that it's just, it's difficult when you have a lot of trust in a mayor and a current staff. And then I've been in Bellingham for 18 years. There have been times where maybe my trust bucket wasn't as full. And so I think that there's, sometimes there's just little things you can throw into a policy to ensure that there's just the opportunity for the council that is elected to do that. So I hope I didn't imply that I didn't trust the
No.
decision that you made. Okay.
No, April, just like when I'm clarifying something, I'm not implying anything either.
It must seem ungrateful.
No, and this last one, it did come back before the council, before the extension was done. It wasn't done by the administration alone with it, and I don't know if it would hurt at all to have something in here, just say, before a contract is extended, it would come back for, to the council, because that's the process that has been done in the past anyway. I don't know if that is a problem.
Yeah, let me.
'Cause sometimes it's just easier if everything's going well, like it was going with SSC. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go through the added expense and everything else to put it back out there when when the majority feels we've got a good product and we've got a good company dealing with it. And
Yeah, we'll take that under consideration, talk to Amy, and talk about the process for extension or going back out.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for all your time.
Anything else from the committee? Okay, well, thank you very much, Ted. Yep. Okay, the next item up is the Transportation Commission update and work plan review. So Ted, you're
Yes.
still on board.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be joined with Jim McCabe, who is the chair of the Transportation Commission. And something that we do each year is the Transportation Commission comes back to the council, gives a report on the activities from the previous year, and talks a little bit about the work plan moving forward. So Jim's been the chair for some time now. He largely put this presentation together. Actually, the Transportation Commission put it together and discussed it at last week's Transportation Commission. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim, and he'll run through a brief presentation here.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, I'm Jim McCabe, the current chair of the Transportation Commission. Let me go on to the, I think you're all familiar with how the Transportation Commission came about. It's been in existence 6.5 years now, and we're old enough now so that a number of our charter members have termed off. We had 2 that were termed off last year, 2 more this year, and 1 more next year. Currently, we have a vacancy, and right now I think we're a little overbalanced on engineers and a little underrepresented by women. We started off with 6 men and 3 women, and right now we have 8 men. So if you know some motivated women who would like to serve, we have a vacancy, and we'll have 2 more in the end of by the end of the year. The duties haven't really changed at all. Pretty straightforward. Again, we're an advisory body to advise council on transportation policy, specifically comp plan amendments, the TIP, Transportation Benefit District projects. This was an add-on compared with when the commission was formed in 2009, in that we didn't have a transportation district until the election and the formation and the election or passage of the TBD levy in 2010. The other things that have happened over the past 6 years are the pedestrian and bicycle master plans. 2015, I'll touch on the Fairhaven Parking Task Force in a little more detail, since that was a long-term effort that was completed last year. In addition to the TIP review, we do the TIP review, the Transportation Improvement Program, every year at our May meeting. This is a joint meeting with the Public Works Advisory Board as well, and then this will come to City Council in June, since it needs to go to the state by the end of June. Part of that program includes the Transportation Benefit District projects. In the past, we've had a separate report to the Transportation Benefit District Board from Public Works on the TBD projects. Since the TBD board has now been merged into the council, this is now covered in the TRAM report, Transportation Report on Annual Mobility, which you should have seen. So there's a chapter 4 in the TRAM that's specifically on the TBD projects, the annual report for the TBD. And I'm not going to cover the TBD projects specifically in this. If there's any questions, Ted can cover those. City Center, we still have ongoing projects involving the City Center plan, downtown parking structure upgrade. The only specific TBD non-motorized project we looked at was the Ohio Street bike lanes, because that involved removal of parking, and as you know, parking always creates problems, or lack of parking creates problems. The other thing that I'll touch on later is the ongoing WTA strategic plan update, which is in progress. I showed this slide, or the first 2 bars on this slide last year. I think this is to illustrate, if you take a step back and look at what we were looking at in the TIP in 2015, in other words, the TIP that was approved last year for 2016 to 2021, this highlights the identified funding. As you may know, in the TIP, the first 3 years of the TIP are identified funds, and if it's not identified, it has to go into the second 3 years of the plan. And so this is a comparison of where the city's transportation funding sources were coming from back in 2008, which was about the time of the financial meltdown, and where we were last year and where we are this year. And the main point, there are 2 points. One, looking forward last year this time, we could not identify any state or federal funds that we could put in the TIP. So we were reliant entirely on street funds and the TBD funding. The other funding there at the top of the 2015 is a bit of an anomaly in that that was greenways funding that were going for the overwater walkway between Boulevard Park and downtown. And the big change this year is this Public Works, as a result of state and federal legislation, is that we now have identified state and federal funds that fill in a lot of the gap. So going forward, I think this is more what we're looking at, and this is the sort of funding that is in the current update of the comp plan. There is a more, what we hope, a reliable mix of state, federal, and local funding to supply our transportation needs. Fairhaven Parking Task Force, this was a year-and-a-half effort supported by Public Works. There were representatives from the Transportation Commission and all the Fairhaven stakeholders. You may recall when the Fairhaven Neighborhood Plan, I think it was called, was updated a few years ago. This was one of the recommendations that came out of that plan. And the result was completed. The task force completed its work in February of last year. TC endorsed it in March, and the council approved the plan in June of last year. It's basically a phased plan to address increasing parking demand. You've seen already implemented the time-limited parking in some areas of Fairhaven. Eventually, as parking demand increases, you may go to meters, you may go to a parking structure at some point, but it's all based on trying to achieve an overall objective of 80% parking utilization and basically a 2-hour turnover in parking. So yearly counts, in other words, how are we doing? And then I think so far the feedback has been pretty positive. Anytime you deal with parking, there's going to be a lot of complaints. But generally, I think partly because there was a broad participation by all the stakeholders in Fairhaven that everybody pretty much bought in. I think I just advanced that. Well, that was pretty much it. Okay, let's look at 2016. Pretty much the same things that we've been looking at. I do want to touch a little on the comp plan. We've already completed in the Transportation Commission the review of the Comprehensive Plan Transportation Element Update for 2016, for the 16 update. It's working its way through the process with the Planning Commission, and so eventually we'll get, I'm not sure exactly what the final approval for the overall Comprehensive Plan Update is, but we've completed our review, and I'd have to say that we think it's a significant improvement over the last update, which was 2006. I think if you sit down and look at what, well, if I take a step back, I'm one of the charter members of the commission, and if I think about what we had as far as transportation planning documents and what you could look at to understand how Bellingham was planning for its transportation going forward, it's you know, a night and day, in my opinion, from where we were then and where we are now. Because if you put together the new comprehensive plan update, I think gives a very much clearer story of where Bellingham is headed over the next 20 years. In addition, it provides more of a funding picture. If you add that together, so that says here's where we are and here's where we're going. You add to that the TRAM report that says here's how we're progressing. You add to that the TBD funding, so we've generated additional funding for non-motorized projects, resurfacing, and some transit support. And then on top of that, you look at the TIP and you can say, okay, and here's exactly where we're going to be spending that money. So, and those are both supported by the transportation or the pedestrian and bicycle master plans. So I think with those documents, you've got a very comprehensive picture that's much easier to understand than it was 2006, 2008. So I think the staff in particular has done a great job in bringing all this together, making it clear, making it easy to understand, and I think it tells a real good story. Now, the funding is not always there. And as you know, the TBD expires at the end of 2020. So that's going to go away unless it's reauthorized, and state and federal funding is not guaranteed. The other thing I do want to do that I missed when we were at the transportation or the Fairhaven Parking Task Force, I do want to acknowledge the great support we had in managing that process from Eric Johnston and Toril Ramsey from Public Works and Jackie Lynch from Planning. They were great in getting the whole process moving and keeping it moving. The other thing I wanted to say on the WTA plan is that that's ongoing. The current plan is, and we have 3 members, current and former members of the Transportation Commission on advisory boards, committees, the steering committee and technical committee. The current plan for that process is to have their service plan approved September-ish, and sometime thereafter the business plan. From the city's perspective, WTA is not in their current plan, assuming that there's going to be, that they will need any funding for the Sunday service, which is currently part of the TBD. So their finances have recovered enough since 2008 so that they can fund that internally as they had in the past. And I think that's pretty much a quick rundown of where we were and where we are. So any questions?
Well, so many of these topics are really important to me, and I just wanted to express appreciation for the Transportation Commission and all the dedicated people that have helped us so much with all these important initiatives. So, Haishka, thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to thank you for highlighting that WTA is in the middle of their strategic plan update. I think there's a lot more feedback that could be given. So if anybody's out there, especially those that are bus goers or are not, because maybe the location or the timing, that you can go online or certainly call city. I'm sure we could direct to where you need to go. And to Roxanne's point, certainly having been part of boards and commissions, and I really appreciate that you've come forward and that you guys continue forward. And I did also want to thank you. I looked back at some of the previous work, and I know that you guys were influential in some of those social justice and equity parts that are deep inside some of the transportation stuff that we look at in the tip and other ways to make sure that we are making sure that we're getting out and being a little more equitable with our resources. So thank you for doing that, and please continue forward on that. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you, Jim, for all the years that you put in on this. I mean, you've provided a lot of service to the city, and we really appreciate it, as we do the other members, because it's a lot of work with this commission, and you've done some great work, and so we really appreciate it. Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Terry, for saying that. Jim's been very good. Obviously, he's very knowledgeable about transportation. He's really jumped in, puts in a lot of time, as do the other members of the Transportation Commission, so staff would like to thank them for that as well. One of the last bullets that Jim touched on, and we talked a little bit about the WTA funding, that's an issue that we'll be coming back to council with in your role now as the TBD. You always served as a TBD board, but now it would likely be in this committee, where we will come back and talk about with the new strategic plan, the expiration of the service contract where the city's funding enhanced transit service. How do we want to deal with, how does the council want to deal with the TBD funding, knowing that it's always been 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 going to transit, with the transit enhancements likely going away, unless council chooses to extend it. What do we do with that 1/3? And there's several different things we can do, but we want to bring that back. We'll be talking about that, staff, with the Transportation Commission, coming forward to council with some options for you to consider, likely in the coming months.
Yeah, that'll be a good discussion.
Yeah.
And a needed one. And if seeing nothing else from the committee, I want to thank you for your report.
Thank you.
And I have to throw something out for the committee. Our committee was scheduled to go from 9 to 10:30, and we're bumping up against that 10:30.
So Terry, I can offer that this is informational only.
Right.
So we can certainly come back if the council would like to be done. We could come back with this item at your next meeting.
Yeah, and so that's what I want, is can you stay? Is that okay? Okay, let's do this then, and thank you. But I wanted to make sure, because I know sometimes our time's scheduled. And
Right. Yeah. So we will move this right along. This is information only, an update on the ongoing water treatment plant project. And I'll just turn it right over to Eric.
Thank you, Ted. So Freeman Anthony, one of our project engineers and the lead project engineer for the project, is going to help tag team this presentation a little bit today. So we are getting really close to sending the project out to bid. We've come to council a couple of times for the last several years talking about this project. And Fred, if you could skip to the... So a couple of things to go over today in the presentation, and go to the next slide if you could, please. We'll try to abbreviate this a little bit and be respectful of your time. So one of the great things about Bellingham, and echoing our earlier conversation about levels of service and quality and policy, is that Bellingham as a community has chosen to have a very high quality of standard for our drinking water. The water that comes out of our tap, we have very little tolerance, no tolerance for any threat to public health, and whether that comes from just with the national media related to lead, we are exceptional in our performance in reducing the lead. And the need for the pretreatment project, I think, is rooted in that culture of having a very high quality drinking water. This is a project that is important to do to help preserve and protect our drinking water quality. So our objectives with this project are very consistent with our efforts to preserve Lake Whatcom and improve the health of the lake itself through the Lake Whatcom Management Plan. But the pretreatment system is necessary to help continue that high quality drinking water going into our homes for our children and our families to drink. One of the issues that we're seeing within the water system is an increase in a certain type of byproduct that comes from chlorine, and this project will help us reduce that byproduct. So one of the questions that's come up as we've presented this project to a couple of the public groups over the last 6 months is, why do we need to do this, and what shouldn't we just take care of the lake and we should be careful with, be fine with that? I think that is a fair, valid assessment, very valid concern, but I think that both things need to happen. We need to make the investments to preserve and protect the quality of the lake through the Lake Whatcom Management Plan, but we also need to do the pretreatment project, and that is really truly to preserve and protect our drinking water for our customers for the long term. That does come at a cost. So by doing both things, the rates will go up, and our customers will be expected to pay for those improvements, both at the Lake Whatcom Management Plan and for the pretreatment system. But if there's one message we can help convey to our customers, is that we have a very high standard for our drinking water, water coming out of the tap, and this project will help preserve and ensure that for many, many years to come. We are also going to change the disinfection system. It's getting to be old, and we're going to swap out the chlorine gas system and replace it with a system that will produce the disinfection material on site. So rather than bringing chlorine gas in on a truck, we'll be generating that right inside, and that's intended to help keep the public safe and to have a lower risk of a problem if there were to ever be an issue with that. We've never had an issue, but we don't want to create an issue as well. So that's the objectives of the project, and Fritz can take it from there.
Thank you, Eric. Freeman Anthony, Public Works. And I was going to remind, the last time we were here, we've done 2 pre-purchase agreements for this project where we've bought various widgets prior. But now we can kind of give you the full scope as we basically finish the permitting process and look forward to an August start date. So the pretreatment facility is, it's located basically adjacent to the existing water treatment plant. If you've been there, it's going to be on your left as you come into the existing site. So the road on the lower left there of that graphic is the access road. It's a 2-train system. We are future-proofing it such that if we need to add one in the future, we can. It'll include some site improvements. Obviously, to fit this in, we'll have to reroute the traffic around a little bit, and your standard stormwater improvements and that kind of thing. There'll be obviously the large bore piping connections to the existing system. We'll have some limitations on the contractor's ability to do those cut-ins, because that is a pretty risky part of the construction, because you're interrupting your raw water flow for up to 24 hours. And under those situations, we'll basically top off all the reservoirs, talk to the fire department about doing any extra fire drills and maybe have them hold off. No extra flushing of hydrants on that particular day. As Eric mentioned, there'll be disinfection system upgrades, and that's the 4 tanks that you see there. It's an on-site hypochlorite generation system. Because we're doing this, we'll have to do some building code upgrades, just because that's what the IBC will require, and because we're changing kind of what the chemical storage layout is. And we are going to plan for a future powder-activated carbon injection system. That's basically gives you some flexibility in dealing with taste and odor issues. But we're not going to put that in just yet. We're just going to get the space in there for it. As far as costs go, a couple of key components is that we do have a 1% for the arts requirement for this, and so we don't really know exactly what we're doing. We've worked with planning a little bit and have kind of got some conceptual ideas on how to integrate the art with some of the infrastructure that we're going to build. And they'll be taking that through their process over the summer, probably into the fall. They don't really have to know until well into 17 because it'll probably be one of the last things that we do. So they've got some time on that. And then I think a thing that's worth pointing out is we did a constructability review in March. We hired a construction management firm to take a real hard look at the bid documents and to make sure that we weren't leaving things out, that we were making the most biddable set of documents that is free of ambiguity as it could be to keep us away from change orders and those type of things that can impact your final project costs. Pretty impressive, 639 different items that we could probably make better. Granted, about half of those are spelling mistakes, but all that is helpful to making sure that when the project is bid, that we get a good responsive bid and that minimizes the headaches later. At our 95% construction cost estimate, which was probably about a month ago, the construction costs, and that includes those 2 equipment pre-purchases, it's all wrapped into that $13.1 million. We're pretty happy with that because that's actually been pretty consistent for the last year throughout the design process. Even with the market going up, we've been able to kind of keep that right where we want it. By the time you've paid for all your soft costs and engineering time, the project cost in this phase is basically $15.6 million. So quick discussion on the rendering, and we went through Shoreline last week, and one of the architects commented that he really liked the building up there, and it is kind of a pretty impressive architectural building, and he asked if we were going to, what our thoughts were going to be on that. As you can see, we're maintaining the current architectural aesthetic of the plant, which is nice. He was happy. It was Fred Grinstead, and he was happy to see that. And so nothing particularly exciting there, just some new doors and access ways and the like. There will be some impacts. I mean, mostly this is done on basically plant area, so it's not like Alabama Street, for instance, but there'll be a little impact to the park access and parking there at Arbor Court. And so we've worked with the Parks Department. We'll get some signage out there, and it won't be a huge impact, but when you have those hot summer days, there'll be a little less parking, and just making sure the parks is aware of that and signed accordingly. We are going to take out a couple large conifers just immediately to the south of the site to accommodate this. It's kind of on the leeward side of that hill as you come down there, so it's a good thing for those to go for sort of safety as well. There will be mitigation requirements in the shoreline permit for a bunch of replanting, and we've got a couple different schemes for that. As you know, if you've used the trail down there, right now the trail kind of goes along the creek, between the fence and the creek. We'll be closing that trail for construction access. Likewise, the connector from the main parking lot where the hatchery is that comes over to the plant, that actually goes along the 66 raw water feed. We'll be closing that for the construction duration, which is probably 18 months. However, we will be putting a new trail connection in there along that road so people don't have to walk on the road anymore. And we see that as a win-win for everybody. We'll be moving the gate further up the road. So now when you park at Arbor Court, you'll be able to see that there's a gate there and it's a restricted access area, rather than people going over the hill and being like, oh boy, I got to turn around. But you'll also have a trail connection, so you don't even have to go on the road anymore. So we think that's really good. We've worked through the Parks Department on that. And so while we're at it, we'll put some interpretive signage. And like I said, we think it's going to be an art fence. We think that's where that 1% is going to go, but I will defer to planning on maybe it's a big statue of Bill Evans riding a salmon. I think that would be pretty cool with that.
That's funny.
So just big picture impacts, you can see the trail detour. We'll have signage. Amy will work that around with the parks folks, and we'll get that both on the website, the Parks Department website, and ours, and posted in the field. You can see the footprint there roughly, and the trail closures. And just zooming in, this shows you where the new fence would be. Again, subject to planning's sort of interpretation. We do have an access road for the back of the DAF that'll be installed there, and that's kind of driving that fence, the new fence location basically further up the road. But we think that's good because it's going to, it makes more of a definitive border between the site and then where the public should be walking and such. Rough schedule here. We are in final design. Put out to bid hopefully at the end of this month, although that might be a bit bullish. And then come back to you guys probably in late July for a council award. And notice to proceed to come shortly thereafter. We want to get most of the excavation done in the dry weather and then really be building up out of the ground come the rain. Complete in February 18, and there'll be some pretty key tie-ins, as I said, with the 66-inch water main. Also, we'll be really focusing on that new chlorine system and making sure that that's tested and doing exactly what we want to do and predictable before we switch over to that, because that'll be a key move. And so with that, I will take any questions.
Any questions from committee?
I was
Yes.
interested in expected increased costs. So what's that going to look like on the utility bill? Will it be a line item saying it's specific to this and that's the increase, or will we just see an increase in the unit amount?
So this project was part of the most recent rate study.
Okay.
And so it was anticipated when council adopted the rate schedule in 2012. And so the project was already included in the rate increases that customers have been seeing over the last several years and through 18. So it is one of a suite of capital projects. It's not identified specifically on a bill. It's just part of your water bill.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else? Well, thank you, committee, for allowing this to go over a little bit, and thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you in
staff for a
July.
good report, and we look forward to seeing the final coming forward.
Thanks, Tim.
So, end of committee.